It is a study of a hunger so profound it consumes the soul of a man and the spirit of a land. Our investigation begins in the vast primordial wilderness of Canada. The year is 1879. Here, in the heart of the boreal forest, winter is not a season, it is a state of absolute dominion. It is a crushing, elemental pressure of cold that fractures stone and freezes mercury. It is a silence so total that a man can hear the frantic beat of his own heart. And it is a whiteness so endless and uniform that the mind, starved of stimulus, begins to turn inward upon itself. In this environment, survival is a matter of grim calculus, measured in dwindling rations and the last reserves of firewood. When starvation sets in, it is more than a physical ailment. It is a psychological corrosion. The gnawing emptiness in the belly is mirrored by a hollowing of the spirit. Paranoia takes root. Comrades, once a source of comfort, become liabilities. Their breathing a constant reminder of the calories they are consuming. This condition, this fever of the soul brought on by extreme isolation and deprivation, was well known to the Algonquian peoples who have inhabited these lands for millennia. They knew that in this desperate state the mind becomes a fertile ground for a terrible suggestion. They understood that the most profound horror of the northern wilderness was not the cold, but the dark impulse it could awaken in the heart of a starving man. The lore of the Wendigo is inextricably linked to the ultimate taboo of human society, the act of consuming one's own kind. Among the Algonquian-speaking peoples, this was not merely a moral failing. It was a spiritual transgression of the highest order, an act that ripped a hole in the fabric of the natural world. To resort to cannibalism, whether through the desperation of survival or the darker motive of greed, was to extend an invitation to a malevolent, hungry spirit. This is the critical distinction documented in the archives. There is the Wendigo Psychosis, a term later coined by academics to describe the intense obsessive craving for human flesh and the paranoid fear of becoming a cannibal, a condition documented among those suffering from extreme starvation. But the indigenous law presents this psychosis not as the disease itself, but as the first symptom of a possession. The madness is the spirit's shadow falling upon the soul. The true horror begins when a person succumbs to that impulse. The act of eating human flesh does not just nourish the body, it feeds the entity. It willingly opens the door and allows the spirit of insatiable hunger to enter and take root. The man or woman who commits the act is no longer simply a transgressor. They have become a vessel.
The metamorphosis from human to Wendigo is not an instantaneous transformation, but a process of horrifying, systematic decay. It is a corruption of the flesh that mirrors the corruption of the soul. The process begins once the taboo has been broken. The initial nourishment provided by the forbidden meal is fleeting. It is immediately replaced by a hunger that is exponentially greater, a gnawing, agonizing emptiness that can never be filled. This supernatural starvation is the engine of the physical change. The subject's body begins to rapidly emaciate. Fat and muscle are consumed from within, leaving the skin stretched taut over a skeletal frame, giving it a gaunt, desiccated appearance. The skin itself loses its color, turning a deathly ashen gray, like old frost-bitten flesh. The limbs begin to elongate, the arms and legs stretching to unnatural lengths, creating a tall, spidery silhouette perfectly adapted for moving through the deep snows of the forest. The eyes recede into their sockets, glowing with a cold, malevolent light. But the most profound transformation occurs internally. It is said that the subject's heart is completely replaced by a shard of ice. This is the core of the entity, a crystalline nucleus of pure, unending winter. The human soul is extinguished, and all that remains is the single driving imperative of the Wendigo. It must eat. And the more it eats, the larger and more emaciated it becomes, a perfect physical metaphor for the nature of insatiable greed. It is a being forever starving, forever hunting, the ghost of a human consumed by a hunger it chose to embrace. Our archives contain a fragmented file pieced together from a recovered journal and a later testimony from a Cree guide. It details the fate of the Blackwood expedition, a party of 4 fur trappers who ventured into the territory north of the Great Slave Lake in the fall of 1878 and were never seen again. The expedition was led by a man named Alistair Blackwood, known for pushing his crews past the point of reasonable risk.
By February of 1879, it was clear they were trapped. An unusually brutal winter had sealed the passes, and their provisions were gone. The journal's final coherent entries speak of a gnawing hunger and a growing, palpable tension within their small cabin. The youngest member of the party, a man named Philippe, was the first to perish from starvation and fever. What happened next is a matter of deduction. The Cree guide, who found the abandoned cabin months later, reported that while 3 graves had been dug, only 2 were occupied. Philippe's grave was empty and had been disturbed from within. The guide's testimony is chillingly direct. One of the survivors had consumed the dead. The journal's last, barely legible scrawl, written in shaking hand, contains only 3 words: "He is changed." The archivist's reconstruction of the events is a grim one. The remaining 2 trappers, Blackwood and a man named McCraley, would have realized what their companion had done. The paranoia of the Wendigo Psychosis would have become a horrifying reality. The man they had shared a fire with was no longer a man. He was a vessel for the hunger of the wilderness itself. The final act of the Blackwood expedition was not of survival, but a desperate hunt. They were not hunting game, they were hunting their former friend through the silent, snow-choked forest, knowing that if they failed, they would be his next meal. They were never heard from again. To categorize the Wendigo as a simple woodland monster is to fundamentally misunderstand its symbolic weight. The creature is far more than a cautionary tale against cannibalism. It is a powerful and terrifying metaphor for the concept of insatiable greed itself. Its unending hunger is not just for human flesh, but for more, an avarice that is never satisfied, a consumption that leads only to a greater emptiness. In the broader context of the 19th century, this legend takes on a new, darker resonance. The Wendigo can be seen as the spiritual embodiment of the colonial expansion that was, at the time, consuming the continent. An endless hunger for resources, for land, for wealth, and for power that destroyed and absorbed everything in its path, yet was never satisfied. It is the spirit of a hunger that takes too much, that upsets the balance of the world, leaving only a hollow, starving void in its wake. The Wendigo is the manifestation of the idea that to consume without restraint is to become a monster. Whether you are a starving trapper in a snowbound cabin or a civilization devouring a wilderness.